How many of you here have served in the military? Raise your hand. Okay, so I'm just getting a feel for knowledge base. And how many of you here are interested in this talk with regard to the military? Raise your hand. Okay, how many of you are interested in the culture of change? Okay, a lot more in culture of change. Good. Thank you. Thank you so very much. So my background is I've spent over 30 years on active duty, serving in the Army, a specific service. And I spent about 20 years involved with changing the Army's culture, change management for the Army. So I'll give you a little bit of my background. So in 1995, I wrote the strategic vision for the 24th Mech Division and Fort Stewart. So I got into change as a major. They rewarded me. They sent me to the Pentagon, and then I was in charge of the strategic mobility program. So that's having to deploy the Army on short notice anywhere in the world. And at that time, in the 90s, I don't know if you remember, but Desert Storm, we were terrible at it. And it took us like 8 months to get the bulk of the forces over there, and nobody was happy with that. So after Desert Storm, they continued to say, Army, you need to get on board and change. Finally, they got the message. In about 96, we started developing the requirement for mobility. So I was in the Pentagon looking at how do you get an Army to deploy 96 hours having a brigade anywhere in the world, 120 hours having a division anywhere in the world, 15 days having a heavy mech brigade anywhere in the world, 30 days having a 2-division, so a small corps anywhere in the world. And that was really challenging. And lots of pieces in the Army, did not want to change. So I got my early taste about changing culture then. And then later on, I was still in the Pentagon. The Army made the decision to go from an analog Army to a digital Army. And that was a big change, because now you have to rely on bits and bytes and zeros and ones, and your tank doesn't work, and you can't see what's going on. And there's a lot of questions of, is that going to work in the dirt? So it took a lot of really top-down leadership but bottom-up assistance to get the Army moving from analog to a digital division. And then we had the other challenge of 9/11, where we also had to look at, do we have enough force structure to fight a long war? And we didn't. So the Army says, we don't have enough units to deploy, so we're going to start breaking up core structures, breaking up the division base, and creating a whole bunch of brigades, a brigade-based Army. And I was kind of right in the middle of that too, right in the concept. So what I will say to you is the way that the Army goes about bringing change is through a concept. It's through a vision of what has to be done, and to visualize it. So I'll walk through that whole idea of how do we go about change in the Army. Now, since the Army has established this concept-based model for change, the joint community bought into it, and they came out with joint policy, joint regulations, and the JCIDS process was born, the Joint Capability Integration and Development System. So now the services all are required to use a concept first before they start going about change. Next slide. Okay. Next slide. So I'm going to talk about the process of change, and this is from the military perspective. So this is based on CJCSI 3170, CJCSI 1020 TAC 2, TRADOC pamphlet 71-20-3. And you're not going to remember that, but there is a basis for how you go about change. And we ask ourselves 3 simple questions. What is the environment telling us? And for you, ours is operational environment, but what is the environment telling us? What are the implications of that change? And then what is our response? What are we going to do about it? And it's a process, because we want to make sure that we're doing things correctly. So when we talk about the environment, the biggest challenge we have is folks in the unit will say, I don't believe you. Show me why that's the environment that I should believe in. And so we had to have a thing called pedigree, where we had to follow something that was respected, credible. So the National Intelligence Council puts out Global Trends 2035, and that's on the web. You can find it. And it's about 200 pages describing the environment. And that's important, so you have a baseline, because the National Intelligence Council is sitting on top of 16 intelligence agencies, and they all have their own opinion. So they all talk about consensus. What can we agree on is going to be in this 2035 environment? So that's the starting point for the interagency and for the department. And then from that, the Joint Staff takes a look at it and creates the JOE, Joint Operational Environment 2035. And that's derived from Global Trends 2035. So there's credibility, people believe it, and they put that out for the joint committee. So they tell the services, you can't make up your own environment. What the services like to do is they want to pick something about the environment that will make sure that the F-35 fighter is the only solution that you need out there, or the M1A1 tank is what you need. But in reality, they have to follow the environment that's given to them. And so that's credibility to the force. It says, this is what Global Trends is saying, and the Joint Operational Environment. And then they take their own pieces, and then they create an environment for their service, but it's derived from that. So there's a pedigree, so that when the soldier says, well, why do I believe that? He says, here's the whole list of things that we go through to make sure this credible environment. But now where the units have an opportunity is what are the implications? And now everybody has to sit back and say, based on what you're telling me, what does that mean for us? And one of the big takeaways for us was artificial intelligence and machine learning. And I'll talk about that because we had to internalize, if the adversary has that and we don't, what happens on the battlefield. And we had to go through a 2-year process to look at that. And then the third thing is the U.S. response. Next slide. So basically, why does the military or a person from the military need to discuss culture change? I would make the argument that we are from a very tough culture to change. I mean, because there's a lot of tradition, a lot of folks saying this is the way we've always done business. We've been doing drilling ceremony since the 1700s. We're going to continue to do drilling ceremony. We've got uniforms. We have the high and tight, haircut. We got spit shine boots. We don't want to change. So it's very hard to change a culture like the military, and the Army especially is very hidebound. And so what do we do to help get this movement in? What do we have to do to get that average, sergeant, staff sergeant E6 on the ground to say, I'm in, I'm buying in a change? And I'll make the proposition that you have to make the case to them. You can't just say, believe me because it's so. You've got to make the argument. So what we talk about is first portraying it, and then identifying and articulating a clear and credible threat. People will respond to threat, and I think you can see that in business too. If you tell them that if you don't change, you're going to be out of business in about 5 to 10 years, then they pay attention and say, oh, I'm going to be out of business. I'm going to have to get a new job. If you tell a soldier that the threat, and that in our case today, it's a peer adversary, in other words, it's a China or a Russia kind of a threat. If the threat is doing artificial intelligence, machine learning, you're going to be out of position. And oh, by the way, they have a lot bigger army than you do. $1.3 billion population versus a $300 billion population. You're not going to have enough soldiers to be successful. So you're going to have to do other things like rely on technology to give you an advantage. So that's what we do. We focus on a clear, credible, articulate threat to them. And in this case, we have documents that says, here's what certain countries are doing in the Ukraine, in Crimea, in Georgia, past conflicts. Here are the weapons that they're using. And oh, by the way, cyber, electronic warfare, machine learning is embedded in there. And if you don't start changing now, you're going to be out of position. You're not going to be able to talk. You're not going to be able to navigate. You're not going to be able to do C2. You're not going to be able to move your forces. You're going to just be sitting out there without any capability. So you've got to change. And in this case, it still took the Army a while to grab on artificial intelligence, because I would say in 2016, we were seeing big signals that artificial intelligence was changing. 2017, folks still didn't do anything, but our commanding general said, get after it. You need to start studying artificial intelligence, machine learning, because that's a dominant driver, and it'll put us out of business if we don't learn about it. And then by 2018, I would say the Department of Defense kicked in and says, yes, we have to pay attention. But even then, it was the Secretary of Defense, Shanahan, putting pressure on the services, and the services still took a while until they finally got it. And I think what you have to do is convince them that they must change for their own survival. Must change. And so now I guess in the business case, we always point to Kodak. So how many of you have heard the Kodak story? Okay, quite a few. So maybe it's overused. But so Eastman Kodak, right? It's a over 100-year-old 133-year-old company founded in 1888. George Eastman, Henry Strong. They got this great idea to get into the photographic film industry, and they dominate the market. I mean, they are out there truly dominating, so that even in '76, they had 90% of the market covered by Kodak in terms of film, and 85% of the market was covered in terms of cameras. So they were being purchased by Kodak. So they didn't feel the need to change, even though in 1975, Kodak had developed the first digital camera in the world. So they had that technology in 1975. And what do you think they did with it between 75 and 2001? Well, they sat on it. I mean, they had it, but they didn't, they had some minor advancements, but they didn't actively say, this is the future, we've got to change, embrace it. Digital cameras, digital photography, digital feeds, that's the way that technology is taking us. Let's position ourselves. No, they waited 26 years, and lo and behold, when they started losing market share and film was being on the way out, it was too late. So they hammered something like over 50,000 jobs between when they woke up by about 2001 to the 2014 period. They lost most of. Now they're down to about 5,000 employees in Kodak. I wouldn't call it a success story, but you can say, what was it about technology that you should have gotten early on and made some real investments in 1975? So that's kind of where we are at with artificial intelligence and machine learning. We've got to recognize we're at the dawn of a new era, and you can change, you can bring that to your formations, you can start investing in those technologies, but not just that, develop the ability to use it. It's one thing to have that capability, but if you can't use it, it's no good to the force too. So I think we've been pretty effective in convincing the average unit that they've got to change. So what else do we have to do? After we say we got to change, then we communicate the vision. That's the business I'm in, is we write a concept. And a concept is soup to nuts. In other words, it's not just taking one niche idea and just say we're going to improve predictive maintenance. It's looking at all the potential applications of machine learning, artificial intelligence, and then saying how will that affect the way that we conduct intelligence, the way that we do recruitment, the way that we do sustainment, the way that we are able to do acquisition reform. What we found is that AI ML is going to affect all of those areas. And we have to quickly identify quick wins, invest in those, and then start bringing it to scale. And fortunately, in Army Special Operations, the value that we have is that you have a culture that trusts the subordinates. It's kind of like what Netflix is talking about. You give them freedom, give them responsibility, but then let them loose. Let them go innovate, experiment. If they fail, they fail. And I think in the special operations community, they do that all the time because they have to have trust. Why? Because that operator is going to have to be by himself somewhere in the world and may not talk to people for months. And we have to just trust that operator, that they receive the right training, education, experience, that they're going to be able to do what it needs to do. Take care of the institution, like Netflix said. Think of Netflix first when you make these investments. So I think there's some parallels with the special ops community and how they treat its soldiers and its junior leaders, and the way that Netflix treats its employees. We trust them inherently. We just say, we know you've got what it takes. You've been through the sessions program, the Q course. You got what it takes to be independent. We're just going to trust you. And if you fail, you fail. But there's nobody better in our formations that could do it if not for you. So because of that, we have a lot of innovation going on from the bottom up. And that's where I think true innovation occurs, not from the top down. The top down, the four-stars will say, we need to get after it. But they never tell you how to do it. Or they never tell you how to do how. They just say, get after it. And they expect the junior sergeants and the soldiers to get after it. So we've got some success stories at the end. But that's what I would depict as how we do change within the Army, within Army Special Operations, And it's based on what I told you earlier, policies given to us. Next slide. In 2017, then it was Lieutenant General Kenneth Tovo, our commanding general, says, I'm seeing so many signs in the environment. You guys do a fresh look and tell me all of the things that are going to be driving our future, and then come up with the top 5. People in the military don't like to hear top 6 or 7. Give it to me on one hand. If it's not 3 to 5, I'm going to forget it. So don't give me 2. 2 is not enough. So 3 to 5. So we came up with these 5 drivers by looking at the evidence. And one other thing going on, of course, is the global socialization paradox. Of course, we saw a global information environment that is, being able to communicate with people around the globe. But at the same time, we saw greater connectivity. We saw this paradox of pockets that are unwilling to change. So it was these diaspora populations that, because of information, they were connected to their home country and didn't have to change, didn't have to assimilate. So we saw this paradox, and we mentioned that to General Tovo. He liked that. But the number 2 was probably the biggest. We looked at what Google was reporting. In 2012, Google reported that they had 2 machine learning projects. And then by 2016, they reported over 1,000, and we picked up on that. They said, there's something going on here. We need to pay attention to machine learning. And then in 2016, they had over 1,000 startup companies. So there was something going on. We didn't know what it was, but we knew we had to get a piece of it. And then data was also doubling. Every 2 years, data in the world was doubling. So in 3 years, we created more data than the history of the world. And we said, we got to pay attention to data. It's the new oil. It's the new language. It's where the investments have to occur. And we started making changes because of data. Network targeting was what we saw the adversary doing. In other words, they were starting to blend the way they were receiving targeting information. They're using civilians in addition to military people. And now we found also this growth of sensors. And these sensors are popping up everywhere. We're calling it ubiquitous sensors. And I'm hearing briefings now where we're going to have the sensors that don't require a lot of power either. So there's going to be a greater proliferation of sensors, and you're not going to be able to hide. And then last, the shifting global order. That's everything from climate change to population migration. There's lots of change going on in the world, and that was our catch-all for driver number 5. Next slide. But now when we got to our senior leaders, they weren't happy with just saying, give me the driver. They wanted to know, now that you got my attention, I need to know the problems that I have to face. And that for us in the military is the best way of change. We have to identify a problem. What's the problem we're trying to solve? Machine learning is great, but prioritize a problem that's going to be solved first, and then I'll know how to apply it. So at the very top of our list, concealment was a big area, because we know with the ubiquitous sensors, it's going to be hard to hide, and not just normal sensors. Now you've got these multi-spectral sensors, infrared, EOI, there's all these ways of finding somebody, a heat signature, that you have to hide against all those signatures, and that's very difficult. Number 2, competency. We realized that our operators did not have the skills that we need to operate in this high-tech environment. We started teaching new cyber courses, electronic warfare courses, machine learning is part of the curriculum, so that they're getting at least an exposure to, here is what you need to know. You may not be able to get it right away, but we're going to expose you to it, and here are some follow-on courses you can take. A lot of courses online for that high-tech advantage. Then number 3, a capability advantage. We noticed in January of 2017, DARPA had a 60-minute video. Anybody see the video on the swarms? Raise your hand. Swarms. Nobody. Okay, that's interesting. Or maybe one. So to us, that's a big threat. Swarms are these little handheld drones, UAVs, that they had. DARPA was able to put them in 100 drone formation, and they're flying them and being able to show that they could. It was almost like a flock of geese. They could be able to. They could talk to themselves. So these drones are talking to them, communicating, and they're issuing orders so that the drone swarm could actually split up into 2 groups or 3 groups or 5 groups, and they could do independent tasks without any humans in the loop. So then we thought, this is a real problem, because it's one thing to have a helicopter that can shoot down one drone, but if you have 100 drones coming out of your helicopter, it's not going to survive. So now we have to come up with counters to the swarm. And I think they showed the swarm in the Olympic ceremony in Korea, and that got more people, more attention because everybody's, in a global, audience can see these swarms, and then we have to do something about that because it's right around the corner. Next slide. Some other problems. Battle networks, I touched on it earlier, and how ubiquitous sensors are changing the network, and we're not going to be able to hide, but we also have to improve our networks to be able to take advantage of all of those sensors and civilians that are part of that intelligence network. Antagonists and antagonized, one of the things we found in the Global Trends Report is that individuals in the future will be super empowered. What do you mean super? What does that mean? And it's connectivity is part of it, but they also start talking about CRISPR. How many of you heard about CRISPR? Raise your hand. Oh, everybody's about CRISPR. So, back then 2 years ago, we started getting very nervous because at the same time in 2017, there was reports of Canadian researchers creating the horsepox virus in their laboratory. And then in 2018, they had a report on how to do it yourself, right? How do you create your own smallpox virus? And we started thinking, well, if you can create smallpox and horsepox, which is very complicated, you can create just about any virus you want to, and that's a threat to our soldiers if you have an unknown strain that we have no antidote for. So we started realizing that these superpower individuals will be a part of that landscape. And then conflict spaces and places, cognitive, virtual, and physical. The Army was always fixed on physical. If it's not physical, I don't want to talk about it. If it's not an M1 tank shooting 120 millimeter round, I'm not interested. Until slowly you started seeing electronic warfare, especially by the Russians, being developed where they are spoofing signals so that ships are not able to know where they are. Vehicles don't know where they are. Aircraft are getting spoofed so that their location is questionable. And they're getting more advanced at this spoofing capability. And of course, jamming, RF spectrum management, and being able to use artificial intelligence to rapidly scan that electromagnetic environment, find out what are the frequencies they're using, jam them, and open it up for your soldiers. So this is very dynamic. This is an area we know I don't think we have a solution for it, but I think that we're getting after RF spectrum sensing and the management of that whole EMS environment using machine learning. Next slide. I only have about 5 minutes. So I'm going to just quickly touch on this and then go into some of our successes. And this is the picture we like, is putting it all on one slide. So they wanted to know where we think the future is going for Army Special Operations. The top line are the trends in the environment. The second line are the problems we face. And the bottom line is what are we going to do about it? And so we had 5 big areas, because if you got 6, it's too many. If you have 2, it's too little. We have 5 areas we're going to invest in to prepare the whole force for this AI ML environment. So next slide. So I'm just going to touch on a few. Okay, empowered soldier. That's the language that's being used by our community. The soldier's going to have a lot more capability than they've had in the past. In that area, one of the things we did with machine learning is recruitment. So we're having a challenge like everybody else in recruiting soldiers for our formations. And not only that, when you come to special operations, easily half of the people that apply don't have what it takes to make it in. So we bring in twice as many people than we need. And they go through the whole accessions process. You spend all this money and then only half of them graduate. Now with machine learning, they have a 96% accuracy rate working with data robot. So when somebody comes off the street and saying, I want to be a special operations soldier, we can tell you with a 96% accuracy, you're going to make it, just based on what the data is telling us. So our commanders started believing the data. When they went through about 5 school classes and they said it's accurate, they started believing the data better than they believe the people that are in the course. That's one. Joint combined arms. So under that, we're talking about now not just orchestrating between the services, but now we have to orchestrate robots. And there's a proliferation now of ground robots, subterranean robots, drone robots, undersea robots. How do you manage all these guys? I mean, and how do you get them to talk to each other? So Solomon Save is a program we're working on with DARPA and USSOCOM AT&L to work with how robots talk to each other. So right now, Solomon Sieve, there's no human in the loop. It's ground sensors talking to drones, talking to data centers, and they're making decisions all themselves. So we're saying, we're going to have you drones go out and collect information in this geographic area, and there's not one human in the loop. There's a human on the loop to stop it if they need to, but there's no humans in that decision-making process. So we're moving out with Solomon Sieve. Institutional agility, predictive maintenance is a good news story. Here again, warrant officers, in the aviation unit under Special Operations Aviation Command realized that they could use machine learning to improve their maintenance. So predictive maintenance is they can predict when parts are going to fail and they replace them. And as a result, when they started this, over a 5-year period, they've cut their costs by 30% easily. And the reliability, now when they can predict, we're going to have X number of aircraft available. They used to have a variance of 5%, now it's down to 0.5% accuracy. So they know that these birds are going to show up and they're going to work when you have a very important mission. Operational synergy, one of the tools we developed was we call the SORT-OE, Special Operations Requirements Tool for the operational environment. What that does, it predicts the next gray zone. So how many of you know what the gray zone is? Okay, no, okay, gray zone are those conflicts that are in between a full-up conflict and peacetime, and they're happening in areas like the Ukraine, where you have other countries involved in Ukraine, but they don't have their soldiers in the Ukraine. They're using proxies and other form surrogates. And we're trying to predict the next gray zone by looking at fragility indexes in that country and being able to look at how much interest do other powers have in that. And based on this sort of tool, we'll know the next conflict before it comes to try to get into that idea of predicting decisions. That's one of those tools. So I just gave you a glimpse of some of the things we're working on. I think we're all bought in. I think we've turned the corner. And at least with Army Special Operations. So on behalf of General Baudet, thank you for your time. I might have a minute for a question if there's a question out there. Yes, sir.
So you spoke at the beginning about coming up with a compelling message and then finding a way to communicate it. Have you found that the message needs to change?
Yes. Yes.
When you look at the different tiers of a large organization?
Yes. Yes.
So yes. At what point do you decide it's worth it to change the message when we're talking to, let's say, senior level versus boots on the ground, versus we're spending too much time on trying to change the message, which could be used for something else? And I guess where my question is coming from is, let's say if it's not the military, it's a private organization,
right,
with multiple stakeholders.
Yes.
How do you balance knowing how much time do I spend in coming up with the different messages versus knowing this one message might be effective overall and I use my time on something else?
Maybe we're not as advanced, but we try to beta test the message. And I know we have a PSYOP community that does that for a living. In other words, measure the behaviors of the message. And they've done that. The PSYOP folks, they're using social media to identify when the message is not working, to change the narrative and do it dynamically. But I don't want to take their thunder, and I might get in the classified area if I start talking. But I will say that we are very sensitive. Now, in terms of this unclassified vision, we have a road show. So we come up with a brief like this, and we go down to the units. I go to the warrant officer course and talk to all the warrant officers. I talk to the junior non-commissioned officers. I talk to soldiers and try to get a feel for how is it being received. One of the strong messages they said is that you're relying too much on technology. What happens if nothing works and we have to go to an analog environment? We have to be prepared to survive in all those things without any electricity or any navigation ability. So that we never got that from anybody else, so you start talking to soldiers. So we come up with a roadshow briefing, and we go on the road and we start talking to people. We go to commanders, we go to staffs and get feedback, and then we change our message or we change our concept if the concept doesn't make sense. The other effective tool that was used by General Dempsey in 2010 is he actually did a video, and then he exported like CDs to all the units to say, show this video, and give us feedback on how my concept is being received. And the other person did it, Airline Battle General Starry, had these videotapes that he had like a series of 5 of these that he said every single soldier in the Army needs to see this. So, you know, nobody missed the message when he talked about airline battle. We haven't done that since then, but I know that they work. It's very effective because even people today said, I got it by watching that video. I didn't get it by listening to my commander talk about it.